From the hacker culture to the social media age, from street protests to online resistance, from separate local voices to global symphony, the last 2 decades has seen a fast-changing scenario of social movements worldwide. Particularly the year 2011, when WikiLeaks, the Arab Spring, and Occupy movement bursted all together, signaled the potential for more radical social change. One of the crucial debates so far is about the role of digital technologies, especially the internet and social media, in the transformation of activism. Then comes the questions, are the new kinds of ICTs causes or just tools for social revolution? How can they lead to the future of human emancipation? Where is the way out of hegemony of states and capitalism? In her new book, Firebrand Waves of Digital Activism 1994 to 2014, Dr. Athina Karatzogianni makes a contribution to the topic. In the first place, Athina draws on a wide range of case studies and divides the history of digital activism into 4 phases. In each phase, Athina examines the functions and impact of ICTs, such as communicating and mobilizing. Beyond the polarized opinions about social media revolution, Athina argues that such a debate is superficial. She goes on to argue that the social movements in the last 2 decades are likely to be mainstreamed and established as politics as usual and becomes less significant. Why does she say so? And how does she assess the role of technology in social-political change? In this interview, Athina shares some of the main ideas of the book, which are closely related to my questions. Specifically, we discuss the role of social media in the Arab Spring. I also talked with an activist about protests in Egypt.
What did you mean by digital activism, and how do you identify the 4 phases? Can you give an introduction to readers?
Okay, so what the book is trying to do is, I suggest, first of all, how I understand digital activism, it has to do with groups, movements, organizations that use information communication technologies, mobile media, computer mediated interaction, mini media, any sorts of digital tools, so to speak, to mobilize against regimes, for democratization, for liberalization, against censorship, for example, in different countries. And they do that outside institutional and representational politics. The first phase I've called there is 94 to 2001, and it stops there, the first phase, because 2001 is when you have 9/11, and that had, as an event, a significant impact on what was going on online, and we know that because there's a lot of work done on that. And then the second phase that I look at is 2001 to 2007, roughly, which is when you have this proliferation of cyber activism, people call it internet movements, because people looked at the globalization movement, for example, and how it went from Seattle to Geneva, Melbourne, and so on and so forth, and how they used email lists and before Web 2.0 to mobilize, how people mobilize, especially the second phase has to do with the Iraq War. Third period identifies from 2007, roughly 2008, that takes to 2010, and then from 10 to 14. So these are the third and fourth periods. And these periods are shorter because they accelerate. You have like first of all, the spread between 2007 to 2008, 2010. We have the spread of digital activism there. And then you had sort of the mainstream. In 2010 is the moment we have WikiLeaks, and from WikiLeaks onwards we have the Arab Spring, you have Occupy, 2011, 2012, you have Snowden, 2013, and this is what I argue is the mainstream of digital activism, and also that in some ways, because there is a revelation, there's not the affair of surveillance and structural data acquisition complete of metadata.
Some scholars argue that social media plays a decisive role in the revolution of Arab countries. Others emphasize negative consequences like surveillance and political control. Instead of joining the debates, Athina argued that the use of social media in movements is mainstreamed and tends to be insignificant.
The digital activism and cyber conflicts of the last 2 decades, like Arab Springs and this movement, Occupy, will pale into insignificance. And why did you say so?
Well, because I think that digital activism, for me, after Snowden, is a red herring, so to speak, because what Snowden revealed is that if you have metadata, structural data acquisition, what you will have there is individuals being so much aware that they are being, their communications are being watched, with the possibility of somebody going deep in what they're saying. So sources, journalistic sources, will not be able to whistleblow, like, for example. So I think in that sense, that's one of the arguments, that basically it's going to be more difficult for people to use, to actually engage in digital activism. On the other hand, I think it's going to be the contrast and the contradiction I have while I'm thinking about this is that you will have a lot of the digital activism is becoming such a part of the everyday of politics, if you know what I mean. You can see examples with Occupy, Black Lives Matter, even now with how the Parisian strikes were actually organized against this new law that came in. And so you had like a site that collected 1 million, a petition side. You have like the Bernie Sanders versus Trump, the mobilization of supporters against Trump. So this use of social media to actually mobilize is becoming part of the everyday life of politics at the same time, right? So that's what I mean by mainstreaming. On the other hand, you have this difficulty of sort of seriously engaging with authority, right? In terms of this, on the other hand, you have this mainstreaming of it, so everybody's at it. So we're not surprised, when we see yet another video of Anonymous, because they've done it so many times. It's part of sort of, you almost expect things to happen. Expect people to use Facebook to mobilize against Donald Trump. This is part of the thing. So it's not something very special anymore, like it was, like 5 years ago or 6 years ago with the Arab Spring, or before that with the globalization movement, anti-war movement, and so on. So it's becoming, on the one hand, part of the everyday politics of usual, and on the other hand, so it's mainstreaming of it as an activity. So it's not, it's part of the politics.
Of social media was kind of very intense, but it was more used as a mean to organize and to reach out to a wider spectrum of people. So yeah, what happened was the whole thing was actually planned on social media, or part of it was planned on social media, because it started as a Facebook event to begin with, and most people at the time were on Twitter, and that was the main kind of mobilizing medium, if we can say that. So there was this stage where it was the organizational phase where people were actually coordinating to what to do. So that was used for social media. And then afterward, it became like this kind of news dissemination force, because not everyone knew that this would happen. Like, people knew, but no one believed actually it will really happen. So when it happened, there was this kind of shortage of media coverage in places. Like, most media organizations would be settled in Cairo anyways, because it's the capital, but whatever happened in other governorates and cities wasn't really covered. So the main source of news coverage for those other cities was social media, whether it's Twitter or Facebook. One of the perks of social media is that it's regarded as a more free space where people can express themselves freely. But this has an upside and a downside, like everything. So the upside would be you would reach more people, you would find more people that actually believe in what you believe or think in what you think. You can have this kind of conversations that wouldn't have been possible otherwise, due to geographical boundaries, due to social class boundaries, due to time constraints or whatever, but now everything is kind of open. The downside, however, is that you're not always aware of who is the person you're talking to. So yes, I think governments or other regimes or other whatever, they can do this, what's called as internet trolling kind of thing. So that, for example, if I think that was a few months ago, there was the anniversary or the first year of having Ala Abdel Fattah, who's one of the most prominent Egyptian activists. He was in prison, and he still is in prison, and it has been a year. So on that year, there was this kind of agreement of honoring him on social media. At the same time, you had many people who are more or less associated with the regime starting this kind of a counter hashtag just to take over the media coverage that's happening. That's one thing. The other thing would be that sometimes people are targeted because of their social media accounts, because again,
Athina argued that the capitalism cannot be separated by a contemporary social movement, and the network logic has failed to offer a solution. So she proposed the notion of revolutionary virtual in order to bridge feelings and actions towards social change.
By the revolutionary ritual, what I meant there was that you have a digital ritual, and then you have a virtual in terms of potentiality, or something might happen or not happen in the way sort of Deleuze is using the virtual. Okay, so if you have a digital materialization, which is what thousands of people being on Facebook saying we're all going to go to Tahrir Square to do so and so. In some ways, between them being online and going to the street and doing it, okay, what is it that makes them go to the street? And this is where sort of affective structures of the overflow of affect can have an impact. So, and this is the moment where the revolutionary ritual exists between the digital ritual and the actual, so to speak, and actually people going down the street to engage in protest and so on. So this is the revolutionary ritual, that you have this moment between the digital ritual and the actual, whether they're going to go or not. Now in Egypt, how it started was...
But what's the difference between the totally spiritual things?
There is no spirit.
It's not spiritual.
There is no spirit. There's definitely no spirit. What I'm talking about is not spirit at all. It's when you have thousands of individuals online, and they all are committing to go to Tahrir Square or whichever square, Sidakma Square or the Wall Street or whatever. You have a commitment there, and everybody can see each other. You have these thousands of people that are going to go, right? So you have this materialization. Now, from there to actually going to the street, okay, what makes them go is what I'm saying, that there is this in between space that I call revolutionary ritual, because they might go and they might not go. So it's the potentiality to actually go physically.
Have the potentiality to go.
Yeah, to go in the physical, real world. And that space, okay, is this space you were talking about, affective structures, and how if it overflows, people are going to go. So this is one of the arguments, but I think that this affective space is not also always just affective, it's discursive and affective, because they have to rationalize as well, their values and beliefs and their feelings together. They have to coincide. So discursive and affective as well. Then they will go. Okay. So this is the point, but this point is not spiritual. It involves material conditions and thinking about emotion and affect and feelings. These are not spiritual. They are coming from us, from our body. We are embodied.
It's a new concept of materialism.
Well, maybe, yes. Maybe, although there is sort of, this notion of agency and how agency is actually distributed across several systems, right? As well, that is a very important point.
Social media still is a medium. It's like having a phone. It's a way to communicate. So people would communicate, people would express their views, and when you express some views and find other people who share the same view with you, so it's a more of a chance for people to get together and discuss things. So again, it's a means of communication. I don't think there is something on social media as social media.
The pleasant conversation with Dr. Athina of her new book was mainly about the relationship between ICTs and social change. In order to find a way out of the stubborn system of capitalism and state sovereignty, Athina examined the 20-year history of digital activism and proposes a new approach which is called revolutionary virtual. She offers a moderate assessment of the role of technology in social movement, as well as insightful observation of the tendency of activism. However, there seems to be a self-contradiction in her theoretical framework. On the one hand, she tends to normalize the socio-political impact of digital technology as politics as usual. On the other hand, she still believes in the so-called potentiality for social change, which is enabled by everyday use of internet. It's partly due to the reliance of network paradigms, which tend to overestimate communication counterpower while lacking attention to a dialectical relationship between technology and the wide range of social forces. It will be more fruitful for both readers and researchers to compensate top-down approaches with bottom-up approaches in order to understand social change without being either utopian or dystopian.
Are you more optimistic or just more pessimistic?
Okay. Well, I'm optimistic about the human agonistic sort of potential to solve problems and to understand, material reality, what is happening around us. I'm very optimistic about that we do make, a lot of strands, especially in the last, century, gone really far. I'm optimistic about that, but I'm pessimistic about how we put some sort of limits to how we consume and how we grow without exploiting fellow humans and without devastating the environment.